Recording in
قلت
כן,
הנה,
הנה.
מעולה.
Mhm.
עכשיו to that run state. Let me introduce myself properly. My name is Dvir Mizrahi. I'm VP of FinOps at Weave. Before that, I was the head of financial engineering at Wix. I was in the FinOps space. I am in the FinOps space for more than 8 years now, advocating automation for quite a long time. And this is something that I'm very passionate about to mature the organizational journey in FinOps by utilizing automation. And I want to talk a bit about why I think it's important for organization to utilize that. And I'm going to take 1 minute of the panel's time and give some overview on what I believe and what the FinOps Foundation believe. When we talk about the maturity level of the FinOps Foundation, if you don't know, it's based on crawl, walk, and run, based on 3 dimensions. You have the inform, operate, and optimize. And based on their framework, even in their framework, it is very highly um, focused on reaching to the run phase in each one of the dimensions by utilizing automation. It doesn't matter if your automation is on the financial side, gaining visibility, gaining anomalies, comparing budgets automatically instead of just doing it manually, or if it's on the operational side, the ability to operate your optimization, waste processes in the organization. And today I really want to focus and deep dive into those questions, like how do I mature my FinOps journey from the crawl phase without automation into the run phase by utilizing automation. And to answer those questions, we brought together an amazing group of professionals in the FinOps area. I'm going to let them introduce themselves as well. But they're going to help us answer those questions based on their experience in building automations in the FinOps space, as well as utilizing them as an end user in their organizations. Let's start with a quick introduction. Phil, do you want to start?
Sure. So I'm Phil Andrews, Global Field CTO here at Cast AI. I've been here almost 4.5 years now. I think I was employee number 23. So I've worked with hundreds of organizations over the past 4 years, implementing automation, evaluating their environments, looking for how to tune from an engineering perspective. So from an automation and FinOps perspective, I've seen a lot of different things, what works and what doesn't work in the actual trenches, working with kind of the DevOps engineers and the SRE side of things. So hopefully I'll be able to bring that perspective today just through the discussion.
Thanks so much for having us, for joining us. Ido.
Hey, so thank you, Javier. I'm Ido, the co-founder of CEO and CEO of Yuki. And I started my career as a DevOps, so I started doing FinOps on the AWS side, and then I did a transition into the data field. So right now, I'm a kind of a niche player here. So we are doing automation of cost optimization and performance optimization on databases, basically cloud databases such as Snowflake, BigQuery, and we are seeing that most of the some of the spends from the cloud from the entire cloud is shifting towards databases, especially in this AI era. So thank you for having me here.
Amazing. And Dieter, my friend.
Hey guys, I'm Dieter Mason. I have been working in cloud financial management since 2013 at companies like Google, Netflix, Intuit, and most recently Roku.
Amazing. Okay, so I want to start with understanding like the fundamentals because automation, as I see it, is not optional. It's the mechanism that enables maturity. And let's start with the beginning. How do you start this amazing journey of automation? Like when we talk about automating FinOps in an organization, there is a vast, as I said, like three dimensions to choose from the governance to the visibility on cost, to the ability to operate on waste and to optimize your environment. Where do you start? Phil, let's start with you.
Sure. We hear from a lot of our customers, especially in our earlier days when FinOps was still a little bit lighter, they'd come to the party and we'd go, we'd do a discovery and they're like, whoa, 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 we don't want automation. We're just looking for reporting. Well, why are you looking for reporting? Well, we've been told to understand where the costs are going. Okay,
Yeah.
cool. That's a good first step. That's the crawl phase. Absolutely. What are you going to do once you understand that? Well, we're going to try to reduce them. Like, okay, well, why not look at something that's going to handle crawl, walk, and run all, with one solution? They're like, because that wasn't what we were tasked with. We were just told to just figure out reporting right now. So that was kind of what we saw with a lot of the early stages. I think that has transformed, with FinOps Foundation, a lot of the education, a lot of the work that like Dieter and kind of leading folks in the field are putting out there. Now people are understanding that you don't just go out and buy a crawl tool and then a walk tool and then a run tool. You look for
Yeah.
a platform or a suite that's going to actually be able to take you through the whole journey. And so I think that's kind of been the evolution of FinOps as far as bringing that forward. So now people are starting to think automation from day one of I might need to understand reporting today, but 3 days from now I need to understand automation. And so they're looking for that kind of full end-to-end solution now more than they were a few years ago for sure.
Yeah, it's amazing because it's the mindset of a DevOps or an architect. For example, I'll ask it to you though, like when you automate the processes, you think like an algorithm, right? So how do you approach that? Like what's the way to start with how do I solve a problem?
Yeah, so for me, it will be the first thing that I did when I started automating was to ask what is my business needs and what is the actual state. So if we are talking about databases here, so let's talk about a platform like Snowflake. It's basically it's a consumption-based platform. So when you are sending queries, you're paying for the query times, and if you send a query that took 5 minutes, you're paying for these 5 minutes. So you usually have different spikes in different workloads throughout the week, right? So I saw a pattern over in 400 Snowflake environments that during the weekends, if we are talking about BI workload, we are seeing that during the weekends there is a slightly lower consumption. So
Okay,
people tend to over provision. You
that's
can start by
classic.
you can start by automating, like reducing the server sizes during the weekends. This is the basic and most like straightforward automation. So this is where I started.
Amazing. So like identifying your pain points and try to figure out how to solve them by utilizing automation. And Dieter, this is an interesting part because what Phil said is like there was a tipping point where people understood, okay, observability is not enough. Like I need to enter automation phase. Can you tell us how it was with you? Like when did you notice that automation is the next evolution?
Yeah, for us, when I started at Roku 5 years ago, we had about 40 million annual cloud spend in public cloud, right?
Wow.
And I looked at the kudos and KPI dashboards and trusted advisor, the typical crawl tools that you have, right? And to my shock, I noticed that we have less than 1% cloud waste,
Wow.
which is remarkable, right? I've never seen in my career such little cloud waste, right? However, over the 5 years that I worked there, our cloud spend went from 40 million to between 150 and 200 million annually, right? And while the cloud waste is still less than 1%, the dollar value increased, right?
Yeah.
So about over a year ago, I was looking for tools that can help first visualize the cloud waste, right? But then I had Philip's presence of thought that I don't want to just have a visualization tool because there's a galaxy of those out there, right?
Yeah.
Every tool can do recommendations, right? Even Trusted Advisor can do recommendations. It's not the greatest recommendations, right? Um, but recommendations is not the end. We were really looking for something that can do more, can help with remediation as well, right? And we needed something that is flexible, that can grow with that muscle that we are building, right? And this is where we looked at multiple tools, with being one of them, right? There's a couple other players in that market, and we
Yeah.
needed something that was because we're just getting started, right? We didn't want something where we needed to build a team internally, right? Typically, there will be three engineers. One is on vacation, the other one gets sick, and we still have one working on it, right? And so we didn't want that type of investment, right? We wanted something that is fairly lightweight, but that can scale as we scale as well, right? So that was our thought process around that.
Amazing. You already touched a lot of the points that we're going to discuss later, but you said something interesting. I want to focus on that word. You said it's like a muscle you need to train. And I really want to ask, uh, what was the harder than expected? Like moving from the observability phase into the automation phase in the organization. Maybe a bit of the cultural change that you had to invest in the company. Like, how did you approach it?
Uh, Me specifically, or do you want to switch to a different person?
No, no. You said like to train the muscle. I really like this phrasing. So I
Yeah,
want to
yeah.
ask, like, how did you train it? How did you make the muscle work?
That is I get it. Yeah. The situation is that the engineers are already, remember, we are under 1% cloud waste, so that is already they have some muscle there. What we needed to build is the governance around that, right? We always had a process for cost anomalies, right? Where and sort of, fortunately or unfortunately, I have this reputation. If I contact you within my organization, right? Something likely very terrible is happening, right? There are
No one wants to hear from their FinOps guy. So
yeah. There are situations where we had something like $20,000 an hour as
ouch.
overrun, right? Where we needed to act very quickly, right? And then there's other situations like that are still very critical, right? That are like hundreds of thousands of dollars annually that need to be looked into. So we piggybacked on that process. And when we built the automation, we didn't want it to be completely automated, right? We wanted a human in the loop. And so we identified the different engineering teams, and we essentially have an Excel spreadsheet that we were able to upload to the software, right? And this gave the software the knowledge whom to reach out to, right? And even if that engineering leader is maybe not the individual contributor that is needs to look into a specific thing, they can delegate that, right? And so that human in the loop being able, and again, the flexibility of the tool, right? That it allows you have like a VP or a director, right? That needs to eventually assign that to a software engineer. And that is, we have, while we do have a hierarchy, right? We have a very close relationship where leadership is working with the engineers side by side, right? And so that allowed us to have that human in the loop and be effective at it and get the approval to move forward, right? So that is sort of like how I built it. I had an existing process, right, and then expanded that process to include other things like waste and underutilized resources, or like just orphaned resources, those kind of things.
Amazing. Those are very interesting insights because as you said, and if I want to summarize the whole conversation, is that about the putting all the stakeholders together in a unified pipeline to automate your FinOps requirements. So
Yep.
scale Dieter as an organization as a service. So Dieter is a service.
Well, I
Um,
want to touch on something real quick. What Dieter
yeah,
said
go
was
ahead.
having engineering and FinOps actually being joint stakeholders in the solution is incredibly important. The projects that I have seen succeed are the ones where engineering and FinOps were actually collaborating from the beginning. The ones that I've seen fail are where FinOps is off on their own and they just go buy savings plans and RIs based on a spreadsheet, and
Yeah.
engineering's off on its own and they have two separate mandates. Because then engineering's like, hey, I found this really great tool that can reduce our waste and reduce our costs and it's going to optimize. And then FinOps says, well, we have 99% coverage on RIs and savings plans. So if you reduce our CPU usage by 20%, it's not going to save us any money because we're contractually obligated to pay that because those two departments were completely separated and weren't talking to each other. But when they come to it with a joint solution and the engineer goes, well, if we put in a good optimization solution, we can save 20%. And then you go buy the savings plans that we need to follow up on that. Now we can get the best of both worlds. Those have been the best, most productive of our customers as far as the leanest organizations we've been able to see.
Amazing. So collaboration is key to success.
Absolutely, absolutely.
So I'm going to have to ask because we've seen the perspective of an automation user field, but you guys are creating automations. Tell me how it's like where do you start?
So the origination of Cast AI was because of, a company where they had basically Dieter's problem, right? The founders of Cast AI, their last startup was it started out at a couple $1,000s a month of cloud spend on AWS. By the time they got acquired, they were at $1.2 million a month, and every month they would save 10%, and the next month they were still 15% higher on the bill. And
Oh,
they've got cloud health, they've got all the tools, and it's like where's the money going? How do we actually save this? Where are we spending? And it was impossible for them to kind of get their heads around. And then it became, somebody else's problem when the company got acquired. But that was the foundation for we need to build a company that actually solves this, from the root. The root is we need to be able to optimize without humans in the loop because there's too many variables for humans to keep track of all of them. And they chose Kubernetes as being the foundation of our platform. That was where we were born, was on Kubernetes. They made the bet that that was going to be the future of most computing. I think it's paid off. Now we've started expanding into kind of other adjacent areas. We're working on GPUs and AI and things like that. But it was born out of a very distinct need, from founders who went through this pain point at their last company. And to Ito's point, he experienced something, a lot of things at his last, when he was a DevOps engineer. Now he's bringing that to his company. That's exactly how Cast AI was founded. Was these were pain points from the past that were brought into the product to solve other people's pain.
it's amazing. And it's also amazing to see that like the complementing approach because one approach is putting human in the loop, putting all the stakeholders together, advance or advocate about that cultural change that you need as a FinOps automated journey. But you said like respectfully, we're gonna get this niche and we're gonna add on top of it like a complete automation without human in the loop in order to scale better while we have a lot of things to do. As you said, like where do I cover all those agendas and how do I automate them without being or putting blockers in the way? Um, Ido, I'm gonna have to ask,
Yeah.
like, if you can share, like, because I want to bring it to a bit more practical kind of guide. Tell me about like an automation you've built end to end. Like, how does it work? How do you approach it? What's your way of starting the automation process, and what is the outcome of an automation? How do you approach it?
Yeah. So I will look back to what Phil just said. So we experience the same, and we are seeing the same phenomena going on for data teams in using Snowflake. So they start small, and the build is exploding super fast, either in Snowflake or BigQuery. And what we basically saw is that we need to solve it automatically without any human in the loop because um, it's too much to handle. Same way as Kubernetes, it's the same goes with Snowflake or any database. And what we found out is that for every query that you send to the database, you deserve every query has the most optimal server or compute resource in real time. So if we are talking, let's talk about BigQuery for a second. Um, if you send BigQuery super complex query that uses a lot of joins, but it reads a very small data set. You might want to send this query to an on-demand because it will be way more cheaper than using the capacity reservation in a BigQuery. But if you have a very simple query like select star from a very huge table, you don't want to use the on-demand because it will scan a lot of data. So right now you can either send to on-demand reservation or to a reservation using slot-based. So when we automate, we look at three different things. The first one is the workload SLA, like how fast you want this query to perform. The second
Okay.
thing the second thing is to look at the query characteristics, the statistic that we have on every query. So in Yuki, we collect data and metadata on every single query, the amount of bytes scanned, the amount of slots used, or the amount of partition scanned, and then we get a profile for this query. In databases, you mostly send the same query over and over again in your ETL job or in your BI dashboards. So we collect data all the time. And the last thing, and which is the most important thing, the current state of the environment right now. Because your reservation might get very clogged and the performance will be affected if you send more query to the same reservation. So maybe routing it to a different reservation or routing it to an on-demand can affect the SLA. So we are doing everything automatically without affecting the performance. And this is how we automate.
Amazing. So when you started building this automation, you had like all those vectors in sight, like this is going to impact performance, this is going to impact cost, and this is going to impact, put your thoughts here.
So at first we didn't have all of that, when we started.
I guess my question is, and I'm maybe going to
Yeah.
ask Dieter about it as well, because I want to understand, like, how do you measure a success of an automated pipeline? So I'm going to move to Dieter. Do you want to share a bit about your successes in the automation? Talk a bit about maybe high-level automation that you've created, and how did you measure its success?
Yeah, so at my current organization, we always used a multiple business KPIs, right? Like cost per streaming hour, cost per active account, cost per operating system build versions, cost per ad revenue, those kind of things, right? And we always encouraged engineering leaders to do optimizations in the cloud, right? But they would be like mini projects or results from hackathons, those kind of things, right?
Yeah.
And we typically tracked their success as whatever the monthly savings were predicted out or projected out over 12 months, right? So if you saved $100,000 through a little mini project, we credited you $1.2 million in savings, right? So that was sort of like the culture, always the culture at my organization, right? When we started using automation, we saw that business leaders were accumulating a mind-boggling amount of savings this way, right? So easily several million dollars would have been tracked, right? And we made a decision to reduce that to just the savings in that month as a result of the economies of scale that this automation enabled. And so if you saved 100,000 in November, you got 100,000 credited in November, and then for December you would start at zero again, right? Just
It
because
is still impressive though, right? I mean,
it is very impressive, right? The
yeah.
automation enabled scaling very well. But we noticed that there were two psychological effects, right? That we didn't anticipate. One was that a person said like, "Oh, I already saved like $3.4 million. I don't have to do anything anymore," right?
Yeah.
Which is not the mindset that we wanted to promote. And the other one was, "Hey, I saved $2.8 million. Can I get some headcount?" And especially if the leader was relatively new in that role in general, not just at my organization, and they didn't understand how headcount works, right? Headcount is for a role that has essentially an infinite duration, right? And if you have a project that is limited in time, you would assign that to a contractor, right? So we didn't want these types of situations. And this is why we reduced to track savings only on a monthly basis, and switch that paradigm, right? So that was very helpful for us.
I love it because you really, we can hear that it's embedded in your culture. So I really like that. But just to summarize, I mean, I love that the way that you use like unit of economics to understand the ROI of an automation that you build, and the ability, of course, to track the money it saved. But it doesn't necessarily has to be money, right? You can automate your operations. Everyone keeps forgetting that FinOps is financial operations, and everybody's focusing on the financial side, but they kind of neglect the operational side.
Yes.
But it is scary, right? I mean, to automate processes, especially in production environments. And Phil, maybe a question to you, like what kind of guardrails do you have when you're running automation, or you when you approach customers with automated processes that might impact their performance, might impact their reliability, or how do you approach it?
Absolutely. So, I mean, in the big, Kubernetes
It's a
is
tough one, so I'm
well,
sorry I dropped it on you.
it's infinitely configurable. I always joke with people, when I'm
Yeah,
on calls with customers, I'm like, it's infinitely configurable. That means there are infinite bad ways to do it, and I've encountered most of them. You go into environments and everybody has a slightly different way of tuning their environment or configuring something. And, engineers like to think that their problem that they solved is the most unique and, problem in the world, and they had to solve it in a very unique way. So every environment we go into requires some level of care and feeding, especially through a POV and through testing phases. And you identify kind of where are their pain points, where are the gotchas. And that's what's evolved to kind of our platform over 4.5 years is all of that input, we've been able to add in more guardrails, more watches for edge cases, more ability to handle edge cases either automatically or with a configuration setting. And that it just takes time. It just takes a lot of at bats, a lot of exposure to new environments because there are just so many edge cases
yeah,
and that's one of the challenges of building automation that's really hard. Consuming automation, it's your POV might be, it might fit in the box or it might not fit in the box. And so your POV might fit with one vendor, but not with another vendor because they've already encountered your issues, whereas they haven't encountered somebody else's.
yeah.
So that's where kind of the definitely POV a new technology, test it, make sure it's, battle test things before you buy it. We've had POVs with customers that have run a year, which is on the long side. Usually they're not that long. And we've had other ones that were 3 days, because it just fit in the box. They turned everything on. It worked fantastic. And so just battle testing things. And there are a lot of newcomers in the market. Some of them are really strong. Some of them are just newer. And that's where for anybody that's looking to do automation, make sure you're actually battle testing it before you're putting it into place. Because a lot of the automated tools have the keys to the kingdom, right? Snowflake. If you crash somebody's ability to run their data analysis and stuff, that could be dollars lost.
Yeah.
We're running Kubernetes. That could be the front door to people making money. Web interfaces to where customers are interacting. All of that is super critical. From a customer perspective, you have to make sure that you are super on the ball to make sure that that is bulletproof. And it just takes time and observing as many edge cases as possible to make the automation resilient.
Amazing. As someone who leaves the automation world for, I think, a year and a half already, I started my first sentence in this panel was automation is scary. So I understand exactly what you're saying. But Ido, I think that I want to redirect that question also to you because maybe you can give us some example of a guardrail that you put in an automation that made it more successful or less or more compliant with the customer's needs, maybe.
Mhm. Yeah. So in Yuki, we act as like a load balancer between queries and their most optimal servers in real time. And the guardrails that we have done is to make sure that we don't affect the way that people work with their current environment. So they don't need to change any users' roles or even the server's names. And we automatically pass it to the most optimal server in real time. That means that whenever we have any outage, the workload goes back to the baseline that they are used to work. with like, so they requested a specific server. Instead of like rerouting it to the most optimal, we will just route it to the original server that they requested. So the most scary thing is that they won't save on on those queries, but everything will work perfectly fine. Another thing was to basically implement a part of our solution inside our customers' environment so they can care of scaling. And if they want to go multi-AZ and multi-region, use deploy it on Kubernetes, maintain this deployment themselves. Um, that solved the problem.
Multi-AZ and multi-region is also scary from a FinOps perspective. Um, Amazing. So we have the guardrails, we have the starting or kickstarting your first FinOps journey, and we have the stakeholders all together. But Dieter, go ahead. I was
Yeah,
about
for
to approach
guardrails,
you.
yeah, I wanted to share
Go
one
ahead.
thing that we found useful is to have an audit trail, right? This event was surfaced at this day and time. This event was then escalated to this person, right? This person looked at this day and time, right? And then this person acknowledged or rejected that event, right? And that provides some help and visibility. Like, for example, the time from where the event was assigned to a person to the person replying to that event, right? Or the person looking at the event but not replying versus the person doing an action, right? That helps us to get a sense of did that engineer lose track? If there are several days between looking and acting, it fell through the cracks somehow, right? If
Yeah.
there's only like maybe an hour or two, maybe they needed to do some research, right? And this is how long it took them to actually work through the things on the backside and then make a decision, right? So having an audit trail was really useful, also for reoccurring things, right? This was right sized, but now it's surfacing again as being underutilized, right? So it was not right sized enough, right?
Yeah.
To get those audit trails is really useful.
I completely agree. And I really love that because I think a lot of us coming from the engineering side into FinOps really love to measure our success with time to resolution or to understand like the those KPIs that keeps our engineers in check when we create that back at Wix, we created an actual production incident for financial incidents. So I love that engineering mindset saying like we need to scale automation in order to reduce our TTR, our time to resolution. So it's a really cool point. And of course, we all know the cycle of FinOps that we continuously have to optimize. So all our questions or all our actions need to be tracked as well. I completely agree. But Dieter, I have to ask you because eventually we talked about putting human in the loop, and I hear you really advocate about it. And I wanted to understand, like, because we talked about multiple disciplines of automations from inform into operate into optimize. A lot of different personas are in that way. Do you change your automation or you build multiple automations that has the same purpose but behave differently for different personas in the organization?
No, we would have different workflows for different use cases, not necessarily personas, right? So
Okay.
an example is actually that we started automation to just surface cloud waste, so reporting, right? And then once that was dialed in, right? And the way we dialed this in, we focused on high dollar amounts, right? Um, and we wanted to tackle those ones first, and then we automated them, having that human in the loop, so that we focus, don't waste our time on something that's $5 a month, right?
Yeah.
We will address
Return
the
on
long
investment,
tail.
right? You don't want to start automating things
Exactly.
that will cost you more to automate.
Exactly. So we will focus on the long tail at some point later, right? And maybe this is where a non-human in the loop automation will come into play, right? We are also exploring things where um, the automation could do a pull request into GitHub, right? And then when the engineer wants to deploy code the next time, they need to either approve the right sizing recommendation or reject it, right? If they reject it, we can send it again, right? We can do another pull request later.
Yeah, with the
Um,
babysitter toggle. Yeah.
Exactly, right? So we are looking at something like this, but when it comes to different personas, one thing that was very surprising to us is that the security team all of a sudden started looking at the automation tooling that we used, right? Because they had use cases that were maybe not cloud waste related, but still cloud related, right?
Yeah.
So, for example, they had a security bulletin that they needed to investigate not the version of an operating system, but the version of a component of an operating system across all the virtual machines, right? And we have like 40,000, 50,000 virtual machines throughout the day, right? So they of course couldn't do that manually, and they looked at our automation tool that we are using and asked the question, hey, is something like this possible? And we said certainly yes. And then they used that human in the loop approval workflow. You can just copy and paste it, right? So it is very easy to do that. To if that version number of the subcomponent of like some application that is part of the operating system, if that version number is too low where it is affected by that security bulletin, then there is a human in the loop. Hey, you need to upgrade this thing, or you need to uninstall it, or do something like that, right? So that was very surprising that they actually enjoy that and adopted that tool very quickly, to the point where I have to explain to them that I'm still paying for it. So they feel like they own the tool now.
I love it. The ability to automate again, governance and compliance, it's something that I really love. But we can't have it all like shiny, right? So we have to discuss a bit about our failures, like when we started automating. So Phil, I'm gonna have to ask you that. What was your biggest failure in automating a process?
Oh, geez.
Oh, I
Well,
keep giving you all the hard questions.
no,
I'm
no,
sorry.
that's fine.
It's
So
just
one of the ones
around
that comes
the
up with us, we added workload right sizing about a year and a half ago. So we were a node autoscaler, node right sizing, getting rid of the actual node waste. And then we found customers were coming to us and be like, yeah, but there's still a lot of waste, there's still a lot of over provisioning. So we went into workload right sizing. The trouble with workload right sizing, and this is I think one of the points that Dieter is mentioning, is there's this battle between engineering wanting to be over provisioned because it's a security blanket, it's a safety blanket,
yeah.
you know, it's not broken, don't fix it,
Nobody want to wakes up at 3 a.m. to some alert in the
Yes.
production.
Exactly. And then you've got on the other side of it, it's yeah, but you've over provisioned it 20x. We don't need that much, especially in dev. So there's this power
Yes.
struggle between the two. And in the early days of workload right sizing, before we had kind of a lot of the guardrails and the knobs and dials that we have now, you'd find that some workloads would get bigger. And so then a customer would come back to you and be like, "You increased my cost." We're like, "That's because it was under provisioned before."
Yeah.
Like sometimes right sizing actually means making things bigger,
Hmm.
because the engineers, not everybody's a Kubernetes expert. There's a difference between requests and limits, and a lot of engineers don't know what that difference is. So they just grab arbitrary values. If it crashes, they add more. If it doesn't crash, they must have gotten it right. So in the early days, trying to figure out how to explain to some people that yes, some of your environment got bigger, but most of it got smaller, was kind of an interesting political challenge, and also just winning. Engineers didn't mind when we were automating nodes because that was the platform engineers' problem. That's DevOps
Yeah,
engineers, that's platform engineers' problem. When we started automating their workload right sizing, then people care. And
yeah,
and
of
so
course.
then it's a political battle, and some people really want it because to Dieter's point, there's been a spreadsheet generated with 10,000 actions and it's been thrown over the wall to engineering and said, go create
Do
PRs
it.
for all these.
Yeah.
And then you just have to chase them with the spreadsheet and beat them with a stick if they don't do it. Workload optimization kind of bridged that gap between Dieter's spreadsheet and the engineers actually being able to fix it. And when you kind of communicate that pain point, I think a lot of people, the light bulb starts going off and people are like, well, maybe we can try it in dev. We'll see how it goes in dev. And then you start breadcrumbing, and you just got to start simple and build trust. And But I mean, there's always something that crashes early on. That's where you start in low risk environments, and you make the crashes as uh, small as possible.
So this is interesting. I'm sorry, though, but I'm gonna have to ask a follow-up question to Phil because we talked about guardrails and we talked about observability, and the success of an automation. And in this case, you kind of said that there are two vectors that are kind of combining together, like what's my performance and what's my cost and what is more important to the organization. Is this some kind of an expectation, kind of setting expectations before running automations? This is what you're going to achieve. This is the impact that it might do, not just financially, but in the reliability side. And this is what we also measure. Or this is something that we always measure the cost, and then if the cost up, we just justify it as an operational excellence kind of an effort. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I mean, so on our side, it's we give everybody a read only first, and it shows you kind of what's going to go up, what's going to go down.
Ah, so a
So
dry
at least
run,
you,
like,
yeah,
okay.
yeah, it's sort of your dry run. So at least then you're prepared. And we also break it down by which changes were based on cost, which changes were based on performance. And so that way you can quickly scan and see, oh, these workloads were undersized, we added them. 99% of the time, it's still going to be a net change, a net reduction in the environment because 90 we did research on this last year. 95% of workloads are oversized.
Yeah,
Yeah.
So even if 5% have to get bigger, you're still winning in the end with the automation. And you just have to show here, look, these aren't killing anymore like they used to. These aren't crash looping anymore. They're better now. And all these other ones get saved cost. And usually that resonates very well with both the Dieters of the world and the platform engineer and the app teams. When things are more stable and less expensive, everybody wins.
I agree. And that 30% waste on the cloud from every research is coming from those workloads. Ido, I want to continue this conversation with you because I think there's a lot of insight on failure in automation. And it's also about like what to measure. And I want to ask like an honest question. When you start building automation, what do you have in mind as a result? Like, is it always oriented in cost savings, or when you're approaching automation, because we talked about performance improvement, how do you approach automation from like the result side? What kind of vectors are in mind when you approach that?
Yeah, so my number one rule is to not affect the performance because when we are talking about database optimizations, we are talking about consolidation and right sizing for different servers. So the number one rule in my perspective, is to not affect the performance because people get used to a specific SLA. They get used to open a dashboard and to see the same result in the same time. And if suddenly the CEO opens the dashboard and it takes like 3 minutes instead of 5 seconds, it will be noticed and someone will get blamed on that. And when you're doing the optimization and you're doing it automatically, you will be the first one to blame, even though the underlying data might be changed and
Pain
it's
is
not,
real. Yeah.
yeah, that there is nothing, I didn't do anything. It's like, but yeah, you're the first one to blame. So we need to make sure that we measure everything, we have audit for everything, and we know to explain what we did when we automated something.
So this is a tricky question for all three of you because I'm interested in that aspect specifically. Any automation you've built with one KPI in mind initially and discovered that it created additional benefit for the teams like after implementation?
I have one.
Okay, go
I
ahead.
have one. So we worked with a company that built its entire basically revenue stream on top of Snowflake. So they were so anxious that they oversight in a way that they spinned up around 3 clusters on every single query. So we did a check how much we can save to this company, and we saw that we can save around 80% in its Snowflake bill, which translated into like $2 million a year. So we did it, and in our initial POC, we saw that when we right-sized the queries to the most optimal warehouse in real time in terms of like size, we cleaned the large warehouses and I mean the large servers from all those tiny workloads that interfered with the concurrency of the server. So we also like increased the performance like 3x.
Nice.
So they
Best kind
benefit.
of automation.
Yeah, 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 yeah. But it happened like a few times. It's not always happening.
Amazing. Any other stories you want to share? Go ahead, either.
Yeah, so we did something when we looked at cloud waste, right? One of the ideas that we had is, are there any databases that are not being used at all? And there are some telemetries that you can use, like how many connections did this thing have in the last 30 days, right? And if the number is zero, then that's an interesting candidate, right? We expanded that also to how much network traffic, how much data transfer is happening on that database instance, right?
Okay.
Some may have very few connections, but there is still a lot of data transfer going on for some reason. But some are literally not having much data transfer and not having any connections, right? And obviously, those were candidates for just maybe not even right sizing, but just turning them off, right? And once we did that, the security team started taking an interest too, because they wanted to reduce the attack surface. If you have servers lying around that don't have any network connections and no data transfer, then this can potentially be a security risk, right?
Yeah,
Where an attacker could be on that compute for days, weeks, and months and do like crypto mining or whatnot, right? Without really being visible. So that was a side effect, right? That we focused on cloud waste and then that expanded to, hey, this is actually also a security concern.
it's amazing aspects. Go ahead, Phil.
To round it out on our side, when we started on workload optimization, and I mean this was one of our fairly early customers. I forget how early it was, but we implemented workload right sizing, and they were really happy with it. You know, most things got smaller, a few things got bigger, and everything. And they said, yeah, one thing that we noticed is for years we've had this kind of steady state, it was about a 0.2% 503 error rate, like 503 timeouts in their production environment. Like after we implemented workload right sizing everywhere, that pretty much dropped to zero. And
Oh,
coming to find out in our event logs, in our metrics, we were finding they had intermittent kills on some of their services that they couldn't track down. They were so transient and it would hit different services at different times, but the end user would get a 503. They basically had built retries into everything to make sure that they accounted for it. And it was just part of their SLAs. Oh, as long as our 503s don't go above 0.2%, we're good. Like they had just built that error rate into their
yeah,
SLAs and they had called it good. And they noticed that it went almost to zero once everything was right sized properly and they got rid of those Zoom kills out of their environment. So in the act of doing FinOps and automation and cost savings, they actually improved their customer experience and their resilience in their environment and got rid of that kind of steady state noise of error rate along the way.
that's pretty cool. Wow. You said the sentence, and the only thing I was able to think about, you said like, yeah, it's in the margin of the error rates that we allow. So it's as scary as a FinOps saying, yeah, it's okay, it's in the budget. So keep it there. It's amazing that you were able to reduce that error margin by right sizing the actual workload.
Mhm.
Amazing. We're gonna have to touch on the hot topic of today, right? AI. And I want to finalize our conversation about automation with any use cases that is interesting to you or that you notice. And I'm not talking about the informed kind of automations where you just get a key and you get the cost from the services. Any cool automation you did around the area of AI, improving models, testing different models, different top K, top P, temperature kind of ways and features or anything like that?
I can lead off on that one if people don't mind. So we
Go
we
ahead.
actually launched an AI enabler product, an AI optimization product. So it does automatic model routing. It'll also automatically spin up open source models within your Kubernetes environment and route to a GPU based instance within your environment if the
Wow.
call volume is over a certain level. So now instead of calling through to OpenAI, you can actually route locally to use
Mhm.
local models when necessary. And we can also source GPUs from anywhere in the world and attach them to your Kubernetes cluster. So
Nice.
if you're based in US East 1, where there's absolutely garbage GPU availability on AWS, and you want to buy GPUs from Ashburn Oracle Cloud, we can attach them natively to your US East 1 cluster, and they appear as nodes in your US East 1 cluster.
That's
So
really cool.
we view AI spending as the next horizon of catastrophic cloud waste.
Mm,
And
Yeah.
it's the single fastest growing line item. It's still buried in a lot of people's cloud spends, but it's the single fastest one growing month to month in most people that we're talking to. And I suspect Dieter probably has some interesting stats on that within Roku about how it's looking over there. But um, that's going to be the next frontier as far as being able to optimize and tune for, and we're trying to get out ahead of that on our side.
Amazing. Ido?
Yeah, so Snowflake just came up with a new AI models that built inside Snowflake, so you don't need to, pull out your data from your database. So this is very secure and very compelling to everyone. And they are charging differently than all of the OpenAI and Anthropic and everyone. So they charge based on request, regardless the token number.
Oh,
So what we found out is that they charge a lot.
I have no doubt.
Yeah.
You have to
So,
cover the margins here.
so what we found out that the number one use case is obviously chatbots on top of your data, and most of the data
mm,
in Snowflake is financial data. So imagine we are now closing Q4, and everyone from the sales team basically asking the same question: What is the current revenue for this quarter? So imagine that every single request is coming to Snowflake, and you pay a lot for every request, regardless the token size.
Yeah.
So caching those results and caching those questions, we saw that this dramatically reduced the bill. So it's not token optimization, but caching those requests and caching those, because at the end, this request is translated into a SQL query, so you can
Yeah.
just return.
Interesting. So cache all your static prompts and just change the relevant tokens.
Yeah.
Dieter, any interesting automation in your end that you want to share?
what I like to do is I found myself using AI to help me create automation.
Hmm.
That I ask it, hey, you know what? I want to know for each of the top 10 engineering leaders, give me their top five workload optimization opportunities across all cloud services. you know and
Yeah.
then once the workflow is there, I try to troubleshoot it. Most of the time it's okay. If not, I can ask an engineer to help me with that, and then the engineer said, like, well, it didn't initialize that variable correctly, right? Instead of top 10 it's at top 1 or something like that, right? And so we can actually build automation using AI, and that was another step to make the automation more available to other personas than engineering.
It's a nice perspective because we were talking about FinOps for AI and you were talking about AI for FinOps, which is pretty cool.
Correct.
I want to leave some time for questions from the audience, but if you can summarize the conversation we had, like five or three, between three and five strong takeaways, like practical takeaways, what do you want our audience to go out with? Like, what is your I believe on automation? Phil, let's start with you. Oh, sorry, Dieter. Let's start with Dieter. Sorry. He
So
pointed. I'm sorry.
if if you take one thing away, is that at scale, automation is the only thing that will be able to help you, right? You
Yeah,
simply can't have 2,000 line items, those spreadsheets that we mentioned earlier, right? That's not I want to say, a humane way of dealing with the situation, right? You will need automation to help you scale, right? If you only have, half a dozen virtual machines, yeah, then, all of this is not for you, right? But if you're working at an organization where you have hundreds or thousands of virtual machines, right? I typically, in my mind, if you're spending $50,000 a month on something, right? it can benefit from automation. And I think that is often overlooked.
I completely agree. And to connect to what Phil said earlier, like there is an inflation of recommendation platforms that gives you like 10,000 recommendations. And he asked the right questions, like what next? And this is why it's the mechanism for maturity. You can't do that without automation. I completely agree. Phil, go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, exactly there. It's automate the toilsome tasks that it's repetitive and it's toilsome. That way your people can focus on the individual tasks. Dieter was mentioning earlier that, databases that have data in and out but zero connections. That's something that's hard to automate. You don't necessarily want to go shut that down because it could be a read replica that's a backup. It could be an important piece of infrastructure. So if you just let the automation go wild and say, yeah, go turn off anything that's idle, well, you might have just wiped out your entire resiliency strategy.
Yeah.
Um, whereas, bin packing and automating node right sizing in Kubernetes, our area that we work in, that's a very well-known space. It's toilsome for engineers to do it by hand. It requires a lot of care and feeding, but it's not overly complex in the core of what you're actually accomplishing. If a machine doesn't have any pods running on it, you get rid of it. If you need more machines, you add more machines, and you add the right size machine. It's difficult to do by hand, but it's reasonably straightforward to automate, with a lot of edge cases there. Find those tasks for the automation.
So
Don't
the
automate the
definite
things that are big and
waste.
scary.
Yeah,
Yeah,
so
yeah,
the
exactly.
definite waste, not a
Yep.
maybe waste kind of area. Although
Right.
yeah, I have to maybe a bit disagree with you because you're talking about automation like a binary automation. Like I have something and then we'll just remove it. But you can also do a soft automation, like a revertible automation for RDS, for example. You can just create a snapshot or just shut it down instead
Mhm.
of terminating it. But there are a lot of ways to operate around like binary automations. So you can still make automation safe.
Mhm.
Just one point. And Ido, your strong takeaway about automation.
Yeah, so I would say that embrace automation early on. What we are
Yeah.
seeing is that teams are shrinking, and it's either you're optimizing or continue building and generating revenue for your company. So focusing on cost optimization 24/7 instead of like getting you know automation early on and focus on building. When I'm talking about engineering team, data teams, and DevOps teams. Um, so yeah, this will be my strong take. I experienced it in my team. So 70% of my employees' time went for optimizations, and we use those recommendation system. And you have a lot of recommendation
Yeah,
from a lot of like all the time, and you need to prioritize. And yeah, so this is my strong take.
I like it. We do have one question, I guess, for you from Perry. So I'm going to read it. Where do most Snowflake cost savings actually come from? Why are teams missing them?
Mhm. Yeah, so most cost saving in Snowflake is basically sending queries to oversight servers. That's what we are saying. It's not like bad SQL, but just sending an entire workload to a specific large warehouse because you can't do any other thing. When you create your JDBC connection, you have to specify one server, and some of the queries need large servers, but most of them doesn't. So doing automation around in the query level will be more efficient. So this is what I see.
Great.
Wait.
Perfect. I just want to mention that we're going to summarize this conversation with all those great insights, and we're going to do something around 10 lessons learned from automating FinOps. So I'm going to invite you all to download it once it's ready. There was a lot of good subjects we talked about here, from starting your automation journey into governance, which kind of guardrails we need to do, what kind of metrics we need to measure, and what kind of unexpected benefits for automation there are. And I want to thank you guys for all your amazing insights. It was an absolute pleasure talking with you. I learned a lot. So thank you so much for that.
Thank
Thank
you
you.
for having
Awesome.
me.
Thank you.
Yeah.
It was a lot of fun.
Thank you so
Yeah, it
much.
was fun. Thank you so much, guys.
You guys take care. Bye.
Bye
Thank
bye.
you, everyone.
Bye, guys.
Bye, Lenit. Bye, guys.
Thanks so much. I really mean it. Thanks.